Hi guys, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and in today's video I'm going to be continuing on with the Labyrinth ballroom scene that I'm creating inside a lantern. Today I'm going to be concentrating on two of the characters. So they're both going to be in masks in the style of a masquerade ball, as well as ballroom dresses. I'm really looking forward to pulling this whole project together, and I've got some pretty exciting things coming up, so stay tuned. Let's get started into the project. The dolls that I'm using for this project, I have bought them off actually AliExpress, to be honest, and I bought a whole lot of them, and what I was looking for is the different hairstyles and that sort of thing, rather than what they were actually dressed in, because I knew that I was going to be redressing them. And actually when they arrived, I did notice that they were in two different body types. So one on the right there is full porcelain, and the one on the left is has got pipe cleaners in for the arms and legs. So this process I'm doing here is I'm just creating the bodice of the dresses, and I'm doing this as the same process as I did for the steampunk lady. So just wrapping them up in some cling film, and then wrapping them also with a bit of tape, so just little strips of tape to wrap around to create the shape of the body. And then that gives me the ability to mark where the seam lines are going to go, which by doing this allows me to make sure that I can get some nice shape out of the bodice of the dress. So once I'm happy with all of the markings on the tape, it's pretty easy just to cut that off with the cling film underneath. Makes for a nice little barrier from the tape. And then once I've cut them into individual pieces, I'm just going to pin those to the fabric and then cut around each one of these pieces, making sure that I allow for a seam, so just cutting it bigger than the actual piece itself. And then all I'm going to do here is just work my way through hand stitching the fabric pieces together, just to create the bodice of the dress. So to create the skirt, all I'm going to do is take a long piece of fabric, and it's longer than I need for the length of the skirt, because what I'm wanting to do is just putting some little gather stitches through, but gathering it up, and I really want to make sure that the back and the sides are particularly gathered, with the front piece reasonably flat. So here you can kind of see that the front is reasonably flat, and with the sides, which I'm hoping to puff out a little bit underneath. And then all I'm going to do now is attach the skirt to the bodice. I think in the original design I had a little sort of V point at the front of the dress, and just through the tininess of the scale, I've actually decided to remove that and just make it nice and flat. So I'm just going to work my way through and just hand stitch the two pieces together, and then this is what it's starting to look like. So I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm just taking another piece of fabric, which I've actually just torn it off the actual main piece, and I do that for two reasons. One, it gives me a slightly frayed edge, which is actually the look that I'm looking for. And the second piece is that I know that it's going to rip straight. So when you cut fabric, it can actually cut wherever the scissors are going to go, and it could be straight, it could be off a little bit, but if it's torn, if you can tear the fabric, it will tear in a straight line. And I just twisted that in the middle, and then just glued that into the middle piece, and then wrap that around the shoulders. So moving on to creating the masks, and I'm just going to make these out of polymer clay, because I've now found a new love or passion with polymer clay. I've done a couple of projects recently, and I actually really enjoy working with it. So I thought, what better material to make the masks out of. So I'm just going to work my way around and just create some shapes and designs and just make sure that it fits into the look of the mask, and just using some little balls of clay and just modeling them in to give it some definition. And I just rolled up a ball of tinfoil just so that when it goes into the oven I can make sure that it bends around or shapes around the face without putting the face in, well, without putting the doll without putting the doll in the oven. So just moving on to painting, I'm just going to put a base coat of this bright red underneath it. It's not going to end up by being this colour in the end, but it's a bit like some of the other painting techniques that I do. I usually start with quite a bright colour underneath because that's the colour that will actually kind of show through underneath as I start putting darker colours over the top. If I start with the darker colours and try to go light, it doesn't always work, and you often lose that depth of colour or the base colour underneath. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to work my way around and just start deepening up that red with just a little bit of black and a little bit of brown as well, and just sort of trying to highlight some of the details that I've created in with the polymer clay, and just working my way around to try and get some really nice definition into the mask. And these wee pieces I also created out of polymer clay when I created the mask, and these are going to make up the necklace for this doll. And all I'm doing here is I've just put a bit of paint over them, and then I'm just adding these onto, or super gluing them onto a piece of embroidery thread. So just adding some final details to the mask. I'm just going over with that brighter colour just to pick up some of those highlights again. And then all I'm going to do now is glue it to the face of the doll. So here she is basically all done. We've got the necklace on as well as the mask, and I've just put a bit of embroidery thread. I've actually glued the mask to her face and then put the embroidery thread around. And this particular doll had a hat, so I've just created a little piece at the top, like almost like a bit of decoration, just to cover the glue that was left from the hat. So moving on to the next doll, this is going to be a slightly different fabric. I purposely did the green fabric first because it is more of a cotton based and it's a lot more forgiving in miniature scale, and I thought I'd give it a go first before moving on to something a little bit more challenging. So this is more of a satin fabric. It's quite soft, so I'm hoping that it will fall nicely on the doll. And all I'm going to do here is just start with the skirt, and I'm just going to create basically the same as what I did for the first doll. But for this one, I'm just going to gather it all the way around, and it's going to be just one gather all the way around the dress. One of the other main features I wanted to create for this particular dress was going to be the sleeve detail, and to be honest, this was going to be a bit of a practice before I got onto Sarah's dress, which has got particularly puffy sleeves. So I've created or designed my own pattern, and so this is basically the shape that I'm going to use, and I'm going to cut this out and then pin it to the fabric, and then just make sure that I've got some detail around, or enough excess around it for a seam. I'm also using the selvage edge. Now I know that normally you would cut the selvage edge off, but it's got quite a slight little fringe detail on the selvage, and I'm actually going to use that to my advantage. So I'm just going to use that for the cuff of the sleeve, and then I also use it for a bit of detail around the dress as well. So once I've got these two pieces cut out, all I'm going to do is cut them, remove the pattern and fold them right sides together, and then just pin these two pieces into place, and then work my way around just hand sewing the two seams together. And once I'm happy with that, then the other step that I do is gather the very top of it. And then once I've got that all together, then I can put it onto the doll. I'll turn it right side in first, and then put it onto the doll, and then once I've got it on the doll, I'm just going to gather up the top part of the sleeve, which you can see I'm just putting those little gather stitches in here now. I wasn't too sure quite how this was going to come together. In my mind it made sense, but it was often not until it's actually on the doll that it actually pulls together. So you can kind of see the little hem sleeve detail just down the end with a little bit of fringe, and then this is the puff of the sleeve. So as it's on the doll, just pulling that gather in, and it's created a nice little puffy sleeve. So I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. And all I do is repeat the process for the other side and actually pull that together as well. For the bodice on this particular dress, all I've done is wrapped a piece of fabric around the doll. I was going to use the pattern that I had created, but I felt that this particular fabric was just a little bit thicker than the other one, and I thought if I could get away with wrapping it around, I'd do that, because ultimately the features of this particular dress are the sleeves, as well as the little bit of fringe detail that I'm getting from the selvage edge of the fabric and the skirt. So I wasn't too worried about the bodice being too much of a feature. So to get the sleeves into place, all I'm doing is gluing them to the actual doll. And here's another couple of strips of that selvage edge that I'm using for a little bit of detail, and also to cover the gather across the top of the sleeve. And then once this is all glued into place, then all I'm going to do is fit the skirt into place. And I'm actually putting the skirt over the top of the bodice, and the reason for that is I want the bodice to be nice and tight to her body, and then for the skirt, it just was going to add too much more bulk if I was going to add it to the bodice like I did for the other one. And I'm really happy with this because it just adds a little bit more detail to the actual dress itself by having the ruffle of the skirt around the top. And I'm really happy with how this one's turned out. Moving on to the mask, just following a pretty similar process as I've done for the other one, starting off with a flat piece of clay and then marking out where the eyes go. So I just make sure that they line up with the eyes on the doll. And then I'm just going to start cutting out the basic shape of this particular mask, and then working in some little snakes of clay and some little balls of clay just to add any of the details in here, and then just blend those into the mask. So I'm just trying to keep this as tiny as possible. And also for this particular one, it's going to have some horns, so I just want to create some additional details around before putting the horns on. And then once I'm happy with the overall design and the style of it, I'm going to again put it over a piece of balled up tinfoil, and then try and prop up the horns in so that they can stay facing forward and don't sort of soften too much in the oven and fall flat, because that really wouldn't give me the look that I'm after. So once that's all baked and all cooled down, I'm going to go over it with a brown paint, just a bit of acrylic paint. It's going to be quite a thin coat. What I'm trying to do here, just like the other one, is that this is going to be the base coat and I'm going to build up on top of that. Also, I'm conscious that I want some detail in the horn, and even though the horns are just flat, but I do want some colour variation. So I'm just trying to make sure that there's a nice light coat of the brown over the top of those horns, and then I'm just going to deepen up the mask again with some mix of black into the brown, and then just layering that over the top, just with a couple of different layers as the paint dries and before I paint on the next layer, if that makes any sense at all. So yeah, I'm just going to work my way through this and also painting the back of it black. So once I'm happy with all of the depth of colour in the mask, and the horns have actually come out really well, so that was just that first coat of paint, I'm actually going to go over with this bone colour and just try and pick out some of the highlights in the mask so that it's not all completely dark. And then once I've done that, I actually do go back just slightly and just deepen up those sockets where the eyes will go, because we're just with that dry brush there was a bit of white that got into those areas. So to fix the mask in place, I am just going to glue it directly onto her face, just like I did with the other one, although I didn't get any video of the other one, so apologies for that. So just using a bit of tacky glue and putting that all on the inside of the mask and then fixing that onto her face. So the other thing that I'm going to do for this particular doll is actually change out the pink ribbon around her hair, because it really doesn't match her outfit. And I played around with a whole lot of different ideas of embroidery thread, and I actually ended up by deciding on using these beads, which are basically kind of a goldy kind of colour and match her dress. And I'm just threading those onto a piece of embroidery thread and then just wrapping that around her hair, just to try and cover up the glue marks from where the ribbon was. And I also left the ends of the embroidery thread just to hang down the back, just for a little bit of extra detail. So there we go, they're all done. I'm so pleased with how these have turned out, and I'm really impressed with how the fabric has come together and how the decorations, and especially the masks. I really am enjoying working with polymer clay and actually creating some of these really iconic kind of features within this particular project. So if you've come this far, consider hitting that like button. It really does help the channel. And also, this is going to be a really exciting build, so subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Turn on that bell notification so that you know when I'm uploading the next video. This is really going to be an exciting project to follow. And without further ado, let's have a look at the final result.